There is this long-standing, almost romantic idea of New Zealand as the ultimate safe haven.
Oh, absolutely. The bunker mentality.
Right, exactly. You hear about these Silicon Valley billionaires buying massive properties in Queenstown, thinking that if the world goes up in flames, they could just hide out at the bottom of the map.
Mm.
It feels safe. It feels completely removed from the chaos.
It is a very comforting thought. And physically, sure, that distance is very real. You have a massive ocean moat protecting the islands. But the premise we are looking at today, and it is a bit of a wake-up call, is that in the digital world, distance is effectively dead. Geography just doesn't offer protection anymore.
Yeah, that ocean moat doesn't stop a data packet traveling at the speed of light.
Mhm.
And that realization really is the heartbeat of the document we are unpacking today. For you listening, we are doing a deep dive into New Zealand's Cybersecurity Strategy 2026 to 2030. This was just released by the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet in February of 2026.
And honestly, for a government policy document, this is surprisingly gripping reading.
I thought the exact same thing.
Right. It reads less like a bureaucratic manual and more like a survival guide for the next 4 years. It's essentially a roadmap for how a nation survives and thrives in an era where the threats are, as the report specifically says, ever rising.
The ever-rising tide of malicious activity. That is a heavy phrase. It sounds like something straight out of a disaster movie.
It does, but it perfectly fits the reality on the ground. And what we're going to see as we go through this deep dive is that cybersecurity isn't just about, IT guys in a basement resetting passwords anymore. This strategy frames it as a core national security issue, a massive economic necessity, and honestly, a basic prerequisite for maintaining a digital way of life.
I have to admit, when I first started reading the source material, I got a little excited because there are parts of this that read exactly like a spy novel. We've got code names, we've got state actors, secret operations. But then you look at the dollar signs attached to these crimes, and the spy novel fun kind of evaporates pretty quickly.
Right. It combines this high-level geopolitical strategy with some genuinely alarming statistics about the cost of cybercrime, plus some very specific, very real case studies. It is a pivot point. The government is basically putting a stake in the ground and saying, we cannot be complacent anymore. That classic she'll be right attitude is now a critical liability.
So let's start with that reality check. The strategy explicitly points out that New Zealand's geographic isolation is no longer a shield.
Correct. The document states very clearly that threats to New Zealand are becoming increasingly borderless. Malicious actors out there, they don't care how many flight hours it takes to get to Auckland. If you are connected to the internet, you are a target. And this isn't just hypothetical fear-mongering. The report details a specific incident that really drives this home, something investigated under the code name Operation Dusky G Low.
Okay, yes. This is the spy novel stuff I was talking about. Operation Dusk GE2 Low. It sounds incredibly dramatic. What actually happened there?
So take your mind back a few years to 2021. There was a major compromise of the parliamentary network. Specifically, we're talking about the networks of the Parliamentary Council Office and the Parliamentary Service. Now, think about what those agencies actually do.
They draft the legislation. They support the entire functioning of the democracy.
Exactly. So this wasn't some random scammer trying to steal credit card numbers or hack a personal bank account. This was a targeted operation going after the machinery of government itself.
And the strategy talks about who was behind it.
It does, and the attribution here is significant. The NCSC, that's the National Cybersecurity Center, investigated this intrusion and attributed it to a group called APT40.
Now, for anyone listening who might not speak fluent cyber jargon, APT stands for Advanced Persistent Threat, right? Which usually implies a state-backed actor.
That's right. It implies a group that is well-funded, highly patient, and generally not just looking for a quick financial payout. In this specific case, the report identifies APT40 as a threat actor affiliated with the Ministry of State Security of the People's Republic of China.
That is a very specific finger to point. Usually, government reports like this are a bit vague, just talking about foreign actors or sophisticated entities in general.
It is remarkably specific, and the source notes that the New Zealand government actually took the step to publicly call out this activity in March of 2024. The strategy document uses this case study to illustrate a major structural shift. We aren't just dealing with random criminals anymore. We are dealing with state-sponsored actors. This is cyber activity becoming absolutely integral to what they call strategic competition.
Strategic competition, which
Hmm.
is really just a polite diplomatic way of saying modern warfare without the soldiers, isn't it?
Precisely. It's pure statecraft. The document actually draws a direct parallel to another major geopolitical event to show how common this exact tactic is becoming. It mentions the cyber attack on international satellite infrastructure by Russia right during the invasion of Ukraine.
Oh, right, when they tried to knock out all the communications right as the tanks were actually rolling across the border.
Yes, that wasn't just a hack in the traditional sense, it was a coordinated military tactic used to support an invasion. It shows that cyber activity is now fully merged with global physical conflict. So, when New Zealand's strategy talks about strategic competition, they mean that the digital realm is now a primary battlefield for influence, espionage, and massive disruption.
It's a little terrifying when you put it that way. It's not just about protecting your personal data or your privacy. It's literally about national sovereignty. But the report points out it's not just the who that's changing, it's the how. The strategy spends a good chunk of time talking about how technology is acting as a double-edged sword.
This is such a crucial section of the roadmap. Technology is moving so fast that it's simultaneously helping both the defenders and the attackers. Take artificial intelligence, for example. We hear constantly about AI saving the world or driving efficiency, but it's also actively arming the bad guys.
I assume the good guys are using it to spot hackers faster.
They are. The report specifically mentions that AI and machine learning help defenders analyze massive, overwhelming volumes of data to spot tiny anomalies. It's a huge force multiplier for defense. But on the exact same flip side, the attackers are heavily utilizing generative AI.
To do what, exactly? Write more complex malicious code.
Well, yes, but more commonly to write better emails. The report specifically calls out that generative AI allows for the creation of far more realistic phishing emails, and crucially, in multiple languages simultaneously.
Ah, so the old days of spotting a scam because it has bad grammar and weird typos,
Mhm.
those days are completely over.
Completely over. Generative AI drastically lowers the barrier to entry for criminals. You don't need to be a master social engineer or a fluent English speaker anymore. You just need the right prompt in an AI tool. The scams are getting fundamentally smarter, much more persuasive, and deeply context-aware.
Great, just what we all needed. And then there's the other looming technological threat the report treats with a lot of urgency: quantum computing.
Now, I know people hear the word quantum and immediately think it's just sci-fi that's 50 years away from mattering, but the strategy warns that within this specific 2026 to 2030 timeframe, it could become a massive systemic problem. They use a very evocative phrase to describe it. They say quantum computing has the potential to turn secure communications into tomorrow's open books.
That is a genuinely chilling line. Tomorrow's open books, meaning all the encryption we rely on today, banking, government secrets, private text messages, could just be cracked open instantly.
Exactly. Current encryption methods basically rely on incredibly complex math problems that are just too hard for standard computers to solve in any reasonable amount of time. A fully realized quantum computer could theoretically solve them in seconds. And the real immediate danger highlighted in the security community is a concept often called harvest now, decrypt later.
Right, where adversaries steal massively encrypted data today, even if it's completely unreadable to them right now, and they just store it on a server until they finally have the quantum power to unlock it.
Precisely. That's why the strategy emphasizes preparing for a post-quantum world right now. Because if you wait until the actual quantum computer is sitting on a desk somewhere, your historical data is already hopelessly compromised.
Speaking of compromised data, sometimes you lock your front door, you upgrade all your encryption, but the thief just comes in through the window. Or in the digital world, they come in through a third-party vendor you trusted. We have to talk about the supply chain section of this strategy.
This is easily one of the most complex risks we face. Our digital supply chains are incredibly, almost unimaginably interconnected. You rely on a piece of software, which relies on other open source software, which runs on hardware made by someone else entirely. It's a massive house of cards.
And the strategy brings up a very fresh, massive example of exactly how fragile this whole structure is: the CrowdStrike outage.
July 2024. I think everyone listening probably remembers where they were for that one.
I think the whole world remembers it. Felt like the entire internet just stopped. The literal blue screen of death everywhere you looked.
It did. And the truly important thing, the source notes here, is that this wasn't even malicious.
Right, it wasn't a hack at all.
No, it was just a standard Software update from a single trusted cybersecurity company that had a flaw, but the impact of that one flaw, absolutely staggering.
The report lists some of the local impacts here in New Zealand, and it really paints a picture. It wasn't just corporate office screens going blue, it was massive queues at supermarkets because the checkouts completely went down. There was widespread disruption in Christchurch Airport. Even daily commuters in Auckland couldn't tag on or off buses and trains with their HOP cards.
And looking globally, the estimated cost to businesses worldwide was at least $5.4 billion.
$5.5 billion from a typo in a routine update.
Essentially, yes. And the critical lesson the strategy draws from this event is about opacity and fragility. We heavily rely on this completely opaque technology supply chain, and an error or a deliberate attack on just one single weak link can cascade through the entire global system. Whether the trigger is malicious or totally accidental, the end result is exactly the same: pure chaos.
That brings us perfectly to the actual cost of all this. Because while CrowdStrike was an accident, there are plenty of people out there trying to cause that exact same chaos on purpose, and they're making a staggering amount of money doing it.
The financial toll is eye-watering. The strategy estimates that New Zealanders are losing over $1.6 billion annually to cybercrime.
1.6 billion. That is a huge chunk of change for an economy the size of New Zealand.
It is a massive drain, and the report notes that this is mainly happening in the form of cyber-enabled fraud. It's just hard currency being siphoned directly out of the country. But while that financial figure is shocking, I think the human cost outlined in the strategy is what really hits hard. It highlights how these attacks aggressively impact the most vulnerable people, particularly targeting healthcare.
Yeah, reading the sections about the healthcare attacks really made me angry. It's one thing to steal money from a massive bank. It's an entirely different level of cruelty to shut down a working hospital.
The Waikato District Health Board attack in May of 2021 is a prime example they cite. It was a highly significant ransomware attack. And it didn't just lock some administrative computers, it severely disrupted critical medical services. Elective surgeries were delayed. Patient appointments were canceled across the board.
The report explicitly says they cut off access to clinical data. Imagine being a doctor trying to treat an emergency patient, and you literally cannot see their medical history, their severe allergies, or the meds they're currently taking.
Exactly. It directly threatened human lives. The source explicitly says, this event demonstrated the clear intent of threat actors to enrich themselves at the expense of the most vulnerable members of our community.
And the board ultimately didn't pay the ransom, right?
No, to their immense credit, the Waikato DHB did not pay. They chose to restore their systems manually from scratch, which is an incredibly painful, painstakingly slow process. But they firmly stood their ground.
But then we have a much more recent example mentioned in the text, the Manage My Health breach in December of 2025.
Right. This is framed as a very recent, highly concerning event in the context of this 2026 strategy. Attackers gained unauthorized access to highly sensitive personal health information. We're talking about roughly 100,000 individual patients having their private medical records stolen.
And again, extortion demands were made to keep it quiet. It's just ruthless.
It is entirely ruthless, and it's shockingly widespread. The survey data included in the report says that 59% of large New Zealand businesses reported experiencing a cyber incident in just the last year.
More than half.
More than half. If you walk into a boardroom full of New Zealand business leaders, the statistical majority of them have dealt with a serious cyber threat recently. It's not some hypothetical future risk anymore. Managing cyber attacks is now just a standard business operating condition.
So the landscape we've got is this. State actors are actively spying. Criminal syndicates are stealing billions of dollars. Hospitals are being held hostage. AI is making the attacks easier to execute. And our entire digital supply chain is deeply fragile.
It sounds incredibly bleak when you summarize it like that.
It really does. But the whole point of this document isn't just to scare people, it's a detailed strategy to actually fix it. So let's pivot and unpack the solution. They've broken their entire roadmap down into 4 core objectives, or pillars.
Right. The 4 pillars. They are understand, prevent, and prepare, respond, and finally, partner. It's a fairly classic crisis management framework on the surface, but there are some genuinely sharp teeth hidden in the details here.
Let's start with Objective 1. Understand. This really seems to be aimed at combating everyday complacency.
It is. The foundational stats show 91% of Kiwis are online every single day. We basically live our lives there. But there is this deep-seated complacency regarding the absolute basics, like basic password hygiene. People naturally think, I'm not that interesting. Nobody specifically wants my personal data.
I think if we're honest, we're all guilty of reusing a convenient password now and then.
We are, and that's exactly human nature, which is what the attackers completely rely on. But from a high-level government perspective, the real problem is that they simply don't have a clear, unified picture of what's actually happening out there because incident reporting is currently all over the place.
Right, currently, if you get hacked as a citizen or a small business, who are you supposed to call? The local police, your retail bank, CERT-NZ.
Exactly. It's heavily fragmented and confusing. So the primary fix proposed in this first pillar is that the NCSC is going to establish a single, unified cybersecurity reporting service. One single door to knock on. This obviously makes it vastly easier for the general public, but crucially, it feeds all that data into one place, giving the NCSC a full, real-time picture of the national threat landscape so they can actually spot emerging patterns. You cannot fight an enemy that you can't clearly see.
Okay, that makes perfect practical sense. Streamline the intake. Moving on, Objective 2 is Prevent and Prepare. And this section includes a specific policy that I found really interesting, the government formally banning itself from paying any ransoms.
Yes, this is their Leading by Example initiative. In April of 2023, the government officially imposed a strict ban on any government agencies paying cyber ransoms.
And what's the ultimate logic there? Because if you just pay the hackers, you theoretically get your critical data back faster, right?
Maybe. But the core logic clearly stated in the strategy is that paying a ransom directly fuels the entire ransomware business model. If everyone keeps paying, the attacks just get more and more profitable, which naturally means you get more attacks. By completely banning payments, the government is desperately trying to break that financial cycle. They are broadcasting to the world, New Zealand government agencies are not a paying customer.
It's tough medicine to swallow, though, especially if truly critical infrastructure data is on the line.
It is incredibly tough. But they are also backing that tough stance up with serious technical prevention. Remember the looming quantum threat we discussed earlier? The GCSB is actively refreshing something they call the Cryptographic Products Management Infrastructure. It's quite a bureaucratic mouthful, but basically it means they are systematically upgrading all the digital locks across government to be fully quantum resistant.
And they are bringing in some heavy legislative regulation too, aren't they?
Yes, this is a major shift. They plan to introduce a strict regulatory regime for critical infrastructure. We're talking energy grids, transport networks, telecommunications. The underlying idea is that these specific sectors are just way too important to national survival to be left entirely to their own devices. They must be legally mandated to meet minimum security standards. You simply cannot run a national power grid with admin and admin as your primary login credentials anymore.
Fair enough. Okay, that leads us into Objective 3, Respond. The main tagline they use here is bouncing forward.
I really like this specific phrasing. The ultimate goal of a response isn't just to bounce back to the exact state you were in before the attack, because, well, where you were before is exactly what got you hacked in the first place. It's about aggressively recovering to a stronger, more resilient position.
And doing that involves some pretty significant legal changes.
It does. The strategy specifically mentions reviewing the Intelligence and Security Act of 2017 alongside other key laws. They want to systematically remove outdated barriers for law enforcement. They need the legal ability to access vital digital evidence across international borders. And very interestingly, they talk about giving agencies the explicit authority to disrupt threats.
Disrupt threats. That sounds highly proactive. That's not just doing a forensic investigation after the damage is done, but actively stopping the attack while it's happening.
Exactly. It implies a much more active, muscular stance from the national intelligence agencies. It's moving from observation to direct intervention.
Finally, we hit Objective 4, Partner. The theme here is strength in numbers.
Look, New Zealand is a small country at the bottom of the world. We fundamentally cannot do this alone. So this pillar is deeply about engaging internationally, aligning with massive groups like the Counter-Ransomware Initiative, but equally importantly, it's about looking closely at our own immediate backyard.
Meaning the Pacific region.
Yes. The strategy strongly reaffirms New Zealand's ongoing commitments under the Bow Declaration on Regional Security.
Can you remind us what the Bow Declaration actually is?
It's a landmark 2018 agreement where Pacific leaders formally expanded the traditional concept of security to explicitly include cybersecurity. The strategy recognizes a harsh geographical reality. If our close Pacific neighbors are digitally vulnerable, the whole region is vulnerable.
Right, because if a hostile adversary can easily set up a digital staging ground in a neighboring island nation, New Zealand effectively becomes a much easier target too.
Exactly. So New Zealand is committing resources to directly help Pacific partners build up their own digital resilience so the broader region doesn't just become a soft underbelly for these advanced threat actors. It's about collective regional defense.
Looking at all four pillars together, it really creates this vivid picture of what they call a whole-of-society approach. It makes it clear that this is not just the IT department's isolated problem anymore. It's the highest levels of government, it's private corporate boards, it's international diplomatic partners, and it's just regular, everyday people doing the basics right.
That is the absolute core message of the entire document. The strategy actively elevates cybersecurity to being a critical enabler of economic growth. It explicitly connects the dots between the $1.6 billion we're losing every year and the urgent need to protect our overall digital way of life. Good cybersecurity is not a nice-to-have luxury anymore. It's an absolute must-have for national survival.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, it really strikes me that the stakes have never been higher. We've gone from this comforting idea of New Zealand is safe because it's so far away to the harsh reality of New Zealand is a target simply because it's connected to the internet.
And because it's highly prosperous, we have valuable intellectual property worth stealing, and we have critical modern infrastructure worth disrupting. The entire shift in the strategy, looking from 2026 out to 2030, is really about finally accepting that reality. It's moving away from being shocked at being attacked to maintaining a permanent posture of readiness. The question is no longer if a major attack happens, but exactly how prepared are we as a society when it inevitably does?
That is absolutely the big question. And looking back at that prevent and prepare section one more time, I really want to leave you with a thought to mull over. We talked about the government officially banning itself from paying any ransoms to stop fueling the criminal industry. They've drawn a very hard, very public ethical line in the sand.
They certainly have.
But right now, private businesses can still legally choose to pay. If a small family business or a regional hospital board is staring down the absolute barrel of losing everything they have, they very often just quietly write the check. My question to you is this. If the underlying moral argument is that paying ransoms actively hurts everyone by funding these massive criminal syndicates, should private businesses be ethically or even legally obligated to stop paying too, even if it completely costs them their proprietary data or bankrupts their business?
That is the million-dollar, or perhaps in this context, the billion-dollar question. It's the ultimate tension between saving yourself versus saving the broader system. And I strongly suspect that specific debate is just getting started.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into New Zealand's digital future.
Always a pleasure to be here.
And to everyone listening out there, check your passwords, update your software, and stay safe.